Jeff, welcome to the Recession-Proof podcast. This focus of the season is all around fundamentals and how businesses can help recession-proof their business. And we're talking to people like yourself, investors, operators, everyone who has seen a lot across the board and can help our customers, help the broader financial leaders and other businesses at large, really help understand what to do. And so I'd love to just start with a quick background on yourself, maybe a 1 to 2 minutes, and then we can dive into the specifics of your expertise on recession proofing, really anything that we find interesting, and then we can pull the threads from there.
Awesome. Yeah, Kimia, thanks for having me on your program. We've gotten to know each other in Miami, in the Miami tech ecosystem, and been a long time user fan of what you guys are building at Ramp. So an honor for me to speak with you guys today. My background, grew up in Los Angeles, a math science guy, did math competitions, science fairs, and then long story short, studied computer science at Stanford and got really deep into the startup Silicon Valley scene. And this was, just dating myself. Graduated college in 2011. So right around when the social network Facebook movie came out, you could really see the uptick of interest for people thinking computer science was all going to be offshore to like India and Asia, and tech being not cool, to, hey, like tech and startups were one of the coolest things that people could be studying. So I've been starting investing in tech startups for the last 10 years. And then most recently moved out to Miami, where I have a couple projects, both on the operating and investing side with angel investing or venture capital investing. Actually was lucky enough to be a seed investor in Ramp personally, and then scaling up that operation to launch Anti-Fund with my partner, Jake Paul, who's a content creator, professional boxer, is really, really a genius in terms of just driving attention. I mean, I think it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of marketing and branding, but also staying very close on the operational side. Probably most relevant for this conversation, have a e-commerce community automation software platform called archive.com, who are really thoughtful around being efficient with marketing spend and how do you drive organic community energy with very noisy, very, I would say, fast-moving dynamic within digital marketing today.
Yeah, that's a classic story from got very interested, the social network came out, and then the trajectory from there. I'm curious on the parallels coming, 2008, you started in 2011 versus operating now, and you really got your genesis of starting companies there. What are the parallels as an operator? And so were you concerned, and again, like there's a lot of dry powder now, were you concerned then, and if you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you change anything? I'd love to just understand the differences in operating.
I think from an operator or founder perspective, macro should not really matter, especially for early stage idea genesis stage companies and teams. Like you're still going to have to get your first customer, your first 5 customers, first 10 customers, and get the initial cohort of true believers around you. So I think even at I was still, I think, a sophomore during the 2008 crash. I remember some of the upperclassmen, a little bit worried about their career paths, but it really just like blew over. And I think we're in an interesting time now where it looks like we're dating, August 19, 2022. It feels like, crypto has rallied from like peak bottoms. I think CPI inflation has seemed to leveled off. I'm in this open debate. Is this really a false bottom? Like, are we going to have this recovery where it just dips further? Right? I have no idea. And I think, frankly, like no one really has an idea. And I think as an early stage operator founder, it really doesn't impact you, right? Like if it's really, we're in like an economy where it really shit hits the fan and like we need to value like 9mm bullets and water and canned food, then like most businesses are just not going to work because like, hey, we're going back to like primordial survival world. So hedging that like black swan, X% outcome, just focus on making something that people want and just focus on the fundamentals. That's my perspective.
Yeah, and I think you've done that both on the operating side with HVMN and Archive. You have a lens into 2 of the most challenging things right now. One is supply chains on the e-com side, and 2 is on Archive on the ad spend side. And so I'm curious, what's changing on each side, and what would you advise founders? Or what are you worried about, really, on each one, is what I want to know.
Yeah, I think supply chain and just changing media spend or marketing spend dynamics, there's still just like, I would say like 10, 20 maybe the most impacted sectors, like what, 40-50% sectors that they're like deviating, and that those are massive if you're talking about $1 billion-$1 trillion markets. But there's still billions and trillions of dollars moving through the system. So I think as a up and coming founder and operator, just really make sure again that you have a skill set, you're offering a service that is more competitive, more efficient than anyone else in the market. So I think on the HMN side, right, like we have this ketone drink, we have a multi-million-dollar military contract from Special Operations Command. We work a lot of elite athletes, and at that high level end of performance, people want that extra benefit and boost and recovery from having ketones, right? So I think for HVMN, we have a widget, a technology that is materially better than a Gatorade or a Powerade or another electrolyte drink or a sugar drink. So I feel like for that specific business, we have a strong opinion around the potential of ketones for metabolism. We're solving it in a way that's more affordable, better tasting, cheaply. We're figuring out the supply chain. But I think it's like when there is customer demand, I think the great thing about capitalism is that resources are marshaled to follow where there is the most demand. If there's an inefficient use of something, well, like I think very quickly the market demands that you got to reprioritize, reallocate where people's attention are. And for better or for worse, that's just where capital, dollars, money is what is like a unifying attention focuser. So again, if you just are able to find like the core primal problem, which is okay, like this is a problem that, hey, like I'm incrementally going to spend a little bit more effort to get your product or service. That's awesome.
And I'm curious on the shifting attention, right? And the capital following the tension. It's a natural segue into Archive, but then more specifically how you think about even your portfolio companies generating eyeballs on the better places. How are you thinking about shifting attention now? And then how would you say extrapolate a lesson out to your portfolio companies? And again, like speaking to our audience, a lot of our audience is wondering where can they get the most efficient return on ad spend, right? Or return on invested dollars to generate customers. And so I'm curious, like, what are you seeing? And then what are you advising your companies on?
Yeah, I would break it into two parts. One is actually being really crisp with your core narrative that you are putting out into the world. And then two, how do you amplify it with technology, with media spend, with all the fancy stuff that you can buy out in the marketplace? And I think you really need both to be special. And I think in my observation over my career, in terms of just like, I think in Silicon Valley in tech, oftentimes you just read the TechCrunch headlines. You're like, how did this company raise so much money? Why is this thing so hyped? And I think it's easy to hate and easy to like be like, oh, that's some bullshit. Or like you just don't understand. And I think I used to be in that camp where I'm like, hey, like world is, I don't understand. People are stupid. Like the investors are stupid. But I think I've just matured in a way where one, you step back, it's like an interesting game. And I think I've realized that you just don't know all the puzzle pieces behind the scenes of what has induced that specific outcome. But I think one common thread that has become increasingly clear for me is that if you can tie why your business is a part of a decades long macro change in how some part of the world works, that's really critically important, right? Like if you are opening a new coffee shop, that's awesome, right? Like Starbucks, Blue Bottle, some of our favorite things that we visit are like great businesses, great brands, a lot of customer affinity. But like unless you have like a new way to talk about like something that's billions of cups are consumed a day, pretty commodity type thing, it's hard to see like that inflection of exponential growth of something that's like a special story that helps your downstream marketing. So I think I encourage that for founders and operators, like what was like the original core spark that even made you want to start this business in the first place? How does this tie into your view of the future and why this is like one of the top 5, top 10 most important things to work about? And I think, just looking at your entrepreneurial story or Ramp's broader story, I think just it's one of the fastest growing companies ever, because I think a core thing around actually applying technology to financial services for business to actually save companies money is just like a really primally valuable story. Being able to find that hook, I think, is like the biggest cheat code. Because I think you can like work super hard on something that just doesn't have a good story, and then you're just not going to get that like tailwind that the entire world kind of wants to see you succeed, or they want to like see you like fail, but like they're still paying attention. Now, like once you have like some of those tailwinds, and I think that's like almost like a key thing I look at both as an operator and an investor, You just need to choose a market, choose and create a narrative that actually is going to be one of the most interesting stories that will be told. Top 5, top 10 stories in that year or the next decade, right? If you're Elon Musk, you're telling the space multiplanetary species story. You're talking about an energy story, right? And that he's amassing and allocating hundreds of billions of dollars, right? Like he's telling the best story. And therefore he somehow is able to like memify why he's able to marshal all these resources. And I think that lens has like kind of oriented where I like to spend my limited time and resources. So find that really core narrative, why this is like interesting from a historical lens. And then 2, what are the different tools, software, automations that are now available to disseminate that message in the most efficient way possible? I think Facebook is an amazing business, but it's pretty interesting that one of the best CEOs of our generation is just hitting some headwinds with, earnings faltering for the first time in like the lifetime of Facebook, Meta. And I think what we're seeing across the industry with Archive's customers and just other digital marketers who are spending, tens, millions of dollars is that there's more of an increased focus on actually harnessing, amplifying existing community word of mouth. I think if you look at the industry of digital marketing over the last 5-10 years, there's been like this new growth marketing, growth hacking discipline that's been created. And I think a technical and hackery approach to driving attention is really, really smart. But I think with a lot of specialization, sometimes you specialize too much or so much that you miss what is the actual thing you're optimizing for. And the core thing of what marketing is just a scaled, positive word of mouth, right? Like that is like the OG version of marketing. Like Kimia saying, hey, or me saying, hey, Ramp is awesome, right? Like how do you harness that? How do you capture that? How do you amplify that? Like that is actually the core fundamental of marketing, the core primitive marketing. And then we built all this stuff around newspapers, TV, digital marketing, Facebook, TikTok to all like do certain attributes of that core primitive. How do I get people to say good stuff about my product service brand? A lot of great companies, services, agencies really focus on media buying, audience targeting, audience selection. How do we build something that automatically harnesses, captures, identifies, for example, like Instagram stories, ephemeral content, 80-90% of where content goes, right? Like Instagram is like really figuring out how to get more people to just post different formats on their feed. There was never a solution to automatically capture all of this really great community content. So a couple years ago, my partners and I were like, hey, like, why doesn't this exist? Like, why can't I have an app, a piece of software that automatically captures mentions of my product or brand on Instagram stories and have it in a very understandable, organized place? The workflow there used to be like hiring a social media intern or a social media manager or a VA, a virtual assistant, manually screenshotting all this stuff. And we were like, hey, like let's build the first software tool to do that. And I think that was like a Trojan horse into automating, collecting, harnessing all this community data. And now we're building like an API to turn and create workflows where if someone mentions Ramp, for example, what if we were able to open up a DM in response to the Instagram mention with an incentive or an offer? What if we were able to use that hook to, you made a really great piece of content, we give you a gift card or we ACH you $20, right? Like if you can actually build a CDP or customer data platform or an API to make the actions of a community actually actionable from the technology side, what does that unlock? And that's the question that we're answering with Archive.
It's interesting because you, back to your how do you harness the attention and the narrative to get it in front of people? That is the core solution of Archive. And so it's sort of meta in a sense where you're taking this message, you're getting it out to customers so they understand that same message. And so you can go, and that's the trend. I'm curious on the anti-fund side of things, how are you thinking about that core narrative? Because we were talking a few days ago, there's a lot of dry powder out there. You were saying there's still a lot of deals, if not more deals now. I'm curious what you're seeing on there and then how you're focusing in the attention and the narrative around anti-fund.
Yeah. With anti-fund, I think one of the core premises that Jake and I realized in the very, very beginning was that, and this is the height of like full bull market, we started anti-fund in early 2021, was that there's really just two resources that all companies, all teams need. You need to have capital, right? Like you need to just be able to pay the bills, keep the lights on. And the second and arguably more scarce community is attention, right? Like at a certain point, we all have 24 hours in a day times 8 billion people. That is like the max limit of attention that exists in this world, right? Like you can kind of print money, do weird financial engineering with money, but literally like the max attention cap of humanity is some 8 billion times 24 hours a day. So anything that can wield attention, I think, is going to be increasingly powerful over time. And I think just especially within the last, like say 10, 20 years, because of information and content decentralization, like, a kid in Indonesia, a kid in South Africa, a kid in Berlin, and a kid in America, like we're all kind of seeing the same culture, the same celebrities, same tastemakers across the board. And I think that cycle is getting tighter and tighter and tighter. So I think that gives an opportunity where one that can master and have a platform to drive and wield attention has more and more outsized impact than in previous generations. So I think one of the core business models that Jake and I look at is, can we find intersections of categories that might not obviously make sense, but if we can drive attention, drive eyeballs onto like something that should exist, that doesn't exist, that's misunderstood, and be able to put not just capital, but our network behind it, can we drive alpha? So for example, I think, one of our recent plays was big into the sports betting category, particularly micro betting. Like, can you create like a gaming product where you can bet on every single outcome of like a baseball pitch, right? Usually sports betting is like, hey, Marlins gonna win or the Yankees gonna win, some money line, kind of complicated. But what if you could bet like, hey, like this is gonna be a ball, this is gonna be a strike, this is gonna be a home run? And that's like actually a technically hard problem, like to dynamically create market odds that on average make money, right? Like the house kind of needs to set odds in a spread that makes financial sense to be the house. That's like a very difficult machine learning, real-time data processing problem. And we realized that if you can apply that technology set to sports, which like is pretty different, domains, could you create like an interesting opportunity? So that was one area that we pushed quite hard in over the last year and a half, where we invested in Simple Bet, which powers a lot of the real-time betting in like DraftKings, for example. And also alongside that, stood up our own consumer-facing sports book. We're fully licensed, sanctioned, and partnering with gaming operators and state gaming commissions to actually get licensed as gaming operators in their states. So I think that's like an example. How do you tie machine learning and sports? No one really knew how to tie them together and then put attention around it. And so far, I think the reception and like the business prospects in terms of like, hey, going from like literally idea phase to being the first money in to, what was publicly announced a week ago, $50 million of capital raised for a pre-revenue, pre-launch startup. I think it's super humbling in terms of a lot of that hard work in terms of what we thought was possible, starting at least from a capital raising side, starting to pay off.
And congratulations on the momentum. That's huge already. I'm curious because on that side, like the common thread across a lot of your focus is how do you harness attention for cheap? I don't want to say cheap, but like it is a great arbitrage opportunity to create a lot of demand very quickly. And on the recession-proof side of things, on the theme of the podcast, it's what's top of mind. How do I drive max ROI for the minimum amount? And attention seems to be that thing. How do you take a great story and how do you drive people to it in an effective way through various means? I'm curious on that thread as well. What are you seeing your great portfolio or other companies that you talk to do that the not so successful ones are doing? Is it that they're harnessing attention to drive cheaper eyeballs and therefore are getting a higher ROI? Are they just blocking and tackling on the basics? Have they found something else? What's jumping out to you in terms of who's doing well and who's not doing well?
Yeah. Before answering that part, I almost want to like reframe how you position arbitraging attention for cheap acquisition, right? Like to me, it's almost inverted where it's like you want your customers pulling product from you versus you pushing product towards them. So for me, it's not even like an arbitrage question. It's just like, if no one really cares, you got to pay a lot of money to like get people to care about what you're doing. Maybe it's like you should think about like why you care so much about it. And do you think the world will come to your perspective, or you're playing a Sisyphusian like journey of like pushing a boulder up a hill that like no one actually cares? And I think it's like a hard question because like I think for a lot of entrepreneurs, like you think you've got to believe that like your idea, your market is like one of the best, most interesting problems to solve, right? If you don't even have that self-belief, then it's like, okay, maybe you should just like step back and why are you even a founder? Because it's freaking hard. Expected value is probably less than just like working like a 9 to 5, right? Like, so I think it's like one, it's like, why is this so important for you that you're dedicating 24/7 energy for something that was likely, statistically likely to fail? And if you don't believe that's one of the most interesting problems to solve, that you should understand that, like, you should reflect on that. And then two, if the market is telling you that, hey, you got to really, really pay people to care, aka like high customer acquisition costs or high CPMs and all these like marketing metrics, I think that induces like a very valuable conversation you need to have with your partners, investors, board. Like, is this like a market that's relevant and that excites us? Because I think that in a world where there's just like people with really niche interests. Like you don't just think when your market area is like intellectually curious at the very, very minimum, or this is like a very big passion. I think it's hard to sustain the discipline and drive to like grind through years and years of pain, basically. And I think like all of us have like these interesting stories where like I'm sure like, to me like you've had like years of like effort around how do you negotiate, save, SaaS offering, helping brands and entrepreneurs save money off of their like subscription services and then ramp broadly. I know that Eric and Kareem are doing, email price refunds, Paribus before they started ramp, right? So it's like, that's not like an overnight success story. It's just like, Paribus was like a decent outcome, right? Like, but it was nowhere near the success level of ramp. And it's like, that was like a 10-year journey to even like get to the point where like ramp could be like this crazy hockey stick growth. So I think to me, it's like, okay, like they've built, failed, learned, succeeded, and grinded through a bunch of learnings to even get to a spot where like, hey, this is like an area that there's like deep intellectual interest and network and like personal excitement. And I think those are like, I think the areas that like the best companies have really found for themselves. Like if you cannot like crisply articulate to yourself and therefore to your employees and stakeholders and to your customers why you think that this is like a top 5, top 10 problem that exists in the world, then like I think it's the common thread. There is some like irrational zeal, passion for their business and for their market that it's driving people to have these like really, really great outcomes. I think when you talk to founders, they're like, yeah, like it's pretty good, just trying to do the entrepreneur hustle, and like that's not enough, and especially in a market like this.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you and I have both seen that across a lot of different founders where it's how are things going? And if they don't hit you back with 17 different answers and they're like, yeah, it's pretty good, it's probably not a good sign. I mean, it's really a question to your point on, especially in recession, on focus, right? What is the core problem that you are trying to solve for your customers? And why do you believe that they should believe in you? And how do you deliver the best solution? On the thread of focus, I'm curious, are you seeing anything change across either your own companies or your investments in terms of just the basics? Because again, there's the growth side and there's the let's generate attention, let's get in front of our customers, let's make sure sales are growing. But then there's also the cost side, right? And so I'm curious, like, how are you thinking about bottom half of the business on the admin side or to your portfolio companies? How are you helping them prepare for anything that might be I don't want to say impending recession, but recession proofing their business?
Yeah. Look, I mean, I think it's like business is not that complicated, right? Like you don't need calculus to look at a P&L and do arithmetic. Like you got to sell something that you charge more than it costs to make and some overhead. At the very, very first level, like is your business actually like unit economic like good? If not, you better have a damn like super big brain like strategy how it's going to like get good, and like don't just say you're going to figure it out. So I think like across the board, I think what is succeeding in this current time, both for like capital raises as well as just like confidence for like employees and team members. I think last year in a bull market, there was like room for like super 10-year underwriting, like 10 years magic roadmaps and changing of the world, and that resonating really well. I think just being like super simple, like little me, like I make this widget for $1, I sell it for $2, and I got to pay a bunch of overhead and 50 cents. I put 50 cents back on the company's balance sheet, right? Like having mastery of that. And if you don't have that ruthlessness to get to that, I think it's just critical. Like that's, I think what everyone should be focused on. How do you become default unit economic positive, default contribution margin positive, and then default like cash flows slash just straight up profitable. Like how do you throw EBITDA on your balance sheet? I
I
think if
would
people aren't
I
having
would
that
wager.
conversation, it's like you're just missing the boat. Like we're running a business, right? Like a business is here to make money.
Yeah, I would wager that probably 5 or 6 months ago, EBITDA wasn't a term that a lot of these people raising money knew. On the point of changing pitches and sort of cash flow is back in fashion, are you seeing a lot of the pitches change with a focus on we sell this for $2, it costs us $1.50 to make. Here's our margin. Or are you still seeing some of the like? What I want to understand is has the transition already happened to a
Yeah,
severe
yeah.
attention to cash flow?
Yes, I mean, I think I already like a lot of founders, CEOs are like caveating. We are not chasing growth at any cost. Like a lot of that language, a lot of that just like, hey, I'm not crazy. Like I'm not just like in 2020 land. I think a lot of those like a lot of that context has already changed. Where before it might have been like, hey, just crazy vision, like I'm the next Elon Musk. To like, hey, like we're focused on like disciplined growth. Yeah, so I think the tenor of the entire market has changed. I think it's the right focus because again, I think everyone's like generally pretty smart. Like you play the game that is being rewarded, and I don't blame anyone or any group that optimized for like top line growth mode because like a lot of people did actually make a lot of money playing that game, right? If SoftBank or Tiger cash you the f out the top of the market with like something that didn't really make sense from like a long term perspective, but like, hey, you cashed out like a couple $100 million personally, and maybe like your employees are screwed afterwards, and everyone else loses money. Everyone was like a big boy and girl, like these very sophisticated people that were wielding that much capital cashed you out. Like as long as you didn't fraud people, lie to people, right? Like it might not be savory, might not be of the best taste, not might be best for reputation, but it's like, hey, that's the kind of the game we're playing. So I don't want to. I'm not here to like point fingers and like talk bad on people, but I think it's like people respond to incentives that with a zero interest rate environment, people are just taking more and more risk. There were some people that like timed it super super well. I don't think you can really time these things. It's like kind of hit the lottery ticket, got to punch out at the top of the market. Good play. Might not be the most savory outcome for everyone involved, but hey, like you did well for yourself. That game is over. I think some founders are still like hanging on to last year's game. I think you just gotta get like a cold water splash on her face. Like, look, I wish we all bought Bitcoin in 20 whatever 10, right? Like we've all been there. Like no one cares, right? Like
Everyone has a
there'll all be
story about
stories.
where
So
they
it's like,
bought
yo, just
Bitcoin. Yeah.
yeah, right. Like oh, you could have been best friends with this
Yeah,
celebrity, or
exactly.
like you could have invested or joined Dropbox as employee two. Like who? No one cares. Everyone has those stories. Everyone has misses. Wake up to like the new reality. Last year's price, yesterday's price does not exist. Yesterday's game doesn't exist. Like wake up. Like play the current game.
Yeah, it's really back out to intellectual honesty about your business, right? And I'm curious on that line of intellectual honesty. Are you seeing planning cycles compress? And so to your comment on like big brain plans for these startups that have raised a bunch of money, 10 years out, this is what we're going to do. We're going to put people on a meteor and then send rocks back. For like the more realistic founders that it's like here's my cost, here's my cash flow, this is what I'm focusing on. Is it more just this is our plan for 3 months, we'll reassess? And then again, how are you thinking about that for your own businesses?
Look, I think like this is like the hard part about entrepreneurship, right? Like you need to have that like 5, 10 year long vision, but also have like a 3 month, month to month, 30-day plan of just like, okay, what are we de-risking across the business? What assumptions are we de-risking, right? Like, is this product scalable? Is this type of customer, this ICP, something that like we can double down on? So I think it is actually quite challenging to be able to be like ruthlessly like 30-day, week by week execution focused and be able to tell this like 10-year narrative. But I mean, I think with startups, a lot of times these are like the outcomes that are like the most interesting are these like super rare outcomes, right? Like I think by definition, like 90% of companies fail. So when we're talking about success, there's a survivorship bias around like people that are great at both. So like I think again, it goes back to like what is interesting. Like I think the most interesting people can tell you this like 10-year beautiful story and then go back to like, okay, like we're shipping this next week. We're going to sign these 5 customers in 30 days. And like this is the quarter like hiring targets. We're going to potentially run these 5 experiments and we might need to like shut down these 2 experiments. So I think that's like oftentimes very, very hard to find in one human. So finding a strong group of partners, co-founders, executives, like that is like the art of entrepreneurship. Like how do you have all your bases covered there? But
You're
like,
trying.
yeah, to your point, it's like, yeah, like I think especially if I'm an investor, I want to be seduced by the damn, this is going to be like one of like the most interesting companies that's started in the next, this year, right? Like that's like I think any venture investor, that's like what you need to like tell yourself, because like if you do the math, like those are like the outcomes that really move the needle for a venture fund. But it's also like, hey, like is this person actually going to like execute, or is he just going to be like a socialite? Like I think we've been in Miami. There's a lot of people out running in Miami. They're just, you constantly just see at parties on Instagram. It's like, well, we'll see, right? Like maybe they pull it out, maybe not. I just know that it's like it's sufficient, but not, or it's necessary but not sufficient.
You want to be George Clooney and actually rob the bank with your team. Not, I mean, maybe rob the bank's a bad analogy because you don't want to defraud anyone, but you get the point. You want to assemble the team. You actually want to execute on
Not
the
do the
mission.
work too.
Exactly. Yeah. You said something interesting that I want to touch on, like on the certain things that you're de-risking. What are you de-risking in your business?
I mean, I think at a certain point, like there's probably some like, I guess from 0 to 1, like does anyone going to actually pay you for your product, right? Like just kind of a very, very like primitive. 2, like how much pricing power do you have? How much margin can you charge, right? Like those are like all risks across like the lifetime of a business. 1, can you actually get people to like give you hard-earned dollars and you put it in your pocket? Like, oh, okay, like people actually value my services. And then it's like 2, is like, is there enough pricing power and value where you can have like an 80-90% software margin product? Or is it like, hey, I'm more of a commodity type product where like I can only charge 10-20%, a little bit of premium, right? Like de-risking how much pricing power, how much value are you actually offering versus like your cost of goods. And then 3rd, from there, what types of customers, what channels actually are scalable. I think oftentimes like anyone who has the confidence, the wherewithal, the courage, the fearlessness to be a founder, it's like, okay, you can probably get like your 5 buddies to like buy something from you and like give you a shot. Cool. Like you de-risk that like someone's gonna like believe in you enough to like kickstart your business. A team member sell it. Is this a repeatable process where you can do email cold outbound, right? Like, or is it required to have like referrals, warm intros, all that stuff? And I think these are all risks that need to be answered as you scale to a $100 million-billion revenue company, where it's like, okay, yeah, like we can hire 10 salespeople doing phone calls and then having like we've de-risked that, like it's not a year-long sales cycle, it's like a 3-month sales cycle, right? So I think it's like you got to start like super, super basic. And then I think each milestone is really answering like a risk question. And I think that's to me how I evaluate investment opportunities. That's how I evaluate like resource allocation. I guess like to me, where I have like a hat from an investor perspective and a hat in an operator perspective, I think it's really the same job. I'm just allocating resources, right? Like there's some levels of abstraction between like being a passive investor, being a board director, being whatever, to like being a more operational executive, different abstraction layers of like how much individual contribution you're doing. But I think fundamentally, we're all resource allocating, right? And it's basically our time slash energy and attention, our money. So that's almost like when I think about every single day, like, am I allocating my resources in like a way that I want to be living my life?
I think a phrase I find I say to myself a lot is simple, not simplistic. And I really like a lot of what you said is really just where's the milestone? What are the risks? How do we operate? How do we evaluate? And it's simple, but it's not simplistic. It doesn't
Yep.
mean it's easy, right? And so a lot of what you're saying is really like, are these the right people to help us get from here to there? And if they're not, that is a risk. And how do we answer that risk? On the topic of team as well, obviously, I think a common thread, maybe a silver lining to recession proofing a business is there is a lot of talent that may be available at a price that is beneficial to a company with cash or with a great story that has access to capital. Are you seeing this across any of your portfolio companies where they're getting more I don't say like high powered, but the talent that they need to execute? Because I would say 6 months ago, the fight for talent is very aggressive. And so I'm curious if that thread has changed at all.
I like your simple but not simplistic. I have a very similar thing I say, which is simple but not easy, which I think is like this. I think expressing the same sentiment, right? Like a
Exactly.
lot of like, I don't know, like boxing, right? Like it's a pretty simple sport, but it's like not easy, right? Like viscerally understand like these concepts, but that by no means is it actually easy or simplistic to execute it day after day after day after day and not get distracted.
I mean, take the
Um,
jab on the boxing analogy. I boxed for a few years. The jab looks like an easy punch. it is not an easy punch.
Yeah, I think it's actually very funny. Where like there's a lot of just seeing Jake progress in his boxing career. A lot of bros just like love shit talking. It's like, dude, like no one actually wants to be in a fight, and they want to shadow box. They just look like clowns. Anyways, yeah, like I mean, I think the greatest athletes and the greatest operators just make everything look easy. That is a sign of their greatness. In terms of talent, yeah, I think there's like the short term, like the job market is basically like people are just being much more conservative with their hiring headcounts, and I think that's like a little short term local pocket. I think that just with my sense of our generation of professionals, the next generation of professionals, Gen Z, et cetera, I think at least this is my perception. Maybe this is like the people that I attract and like the circles that I'm attracted to. I feel like prestige is a lagging indicator of value, right? Like when you realize why like an investment bank like Goldman Sachs spends so much money like hyping up their prestige. I think they're trying to buy a clout in a lagging way. So I feel like our generation and the next generations are just much more smart and attuned towards like fake clout and like real clout, right? Like I think I would say like people are much more skeptical about like games, scams, like tricks. I think there's like an increasing focus around being creators themselves. Like I think there's a recent poll that showed that being a YouTuber was like literally like the dream job for like the next generation.
I
I don't
heard
know if
when
it's
it
good or
flipped from
bad.
astronaut to YouTube creator. That was a big one for me. I was like, whoa.
Yeah, so I think like again, I don't know if it's like a good or bad thing. Like an observation that it feels like more and more people are focused on telling and creating like an individual journey rather than like, hey, our parents' generation like just build a career at like a Raytheon for 30 years and that's like an awesome life. And I think there's like pros and cons to it actually, right? Like I think there is something about like having loyalty, a tribe, compounding relationships year after year after year. I think that's the only way like deep work gets done. So I think there's like an opportunity for great employers, great like people thoughtful around building culture to arbitrage this like changing sentiment towards like the role of a career, role of a skill set in one's life. And it goes back to like I think the first statement, like the people, the companies that are able to attract and be talent magnets have like just great stories to tell, right? Like how do you have a story that's so exciting that a recent college grad or a mid-career professional is like, damn, like I want to be part of this tribe. I want this to be a part of my like life story. I think that like the facade of like, hey, like I want to go join a Goldman Sachs and I don't know, wear a suit. I think that's just like less and less compelling. So I think there is an opportunity if one is thoughtful around, and I don't think people even want that. I think people just want like, hey, I want a team, an organization achieving a goal that I think is like intellectually interesting and should be exist in the world, and people are focused on like being the very best at the craft. That's how I like to recruit people. Like just we're a business. We think this is a super important problem. Everyone here wants to be the world class of what they do, and we're a team, not a family. Doesn't mean like we're not gonna have great friendship, great loyalty, all of that. But like, hey, we're here to win friggin' championships. Like we're here to get shit done. We're not here to like go on cool trips. That's a cool side effect, but that is not the goal of this company, right? And I think that seems to be like quite like compelling for that style has worked for me. Where I think that like there's a lot of like I think doubt around like as a manager, as a founder, like what is your role? And I think it's important to be like, hey, I'm not here to be your like life coach or your therapist or your dad. I'm here to build a business and like I'm here to work like have like a super high performing team. Maybe other people have a different approach to it and that can also work, but my personal style
Well,
is
I
much
think it
more on the
comes
team.
I think it comes back to your point on value, right? People want to feel valued. On the thread of again recession proofing, like some individual contributors or employees might be concerned about their work, but then business, they are extra concerned about keeping the best because this is when it's going to matter and this is when you have to focus. And so to your point on how do you take your narrative, how do you take your story, how do you take your mission, empower these people that you really want to keep, and then find other people to join your mission. I mean, it's really, again, to the story you told of like, hey, we're a sports team, we're a high performing team, here's what we're trying to do. That attracts like-minded people, right? And you're here to win. And I think some of the best businesses were started in, not I think, I know some of the best businesses were started out of a recession, right? Or going into one. Because you just have this intense mentality of here's the vision, here's what we're doing, to what you said earlier. And then 30 day, 60 day, 90 day, we're going to block and tackle all the way down. Are you helping your portfolio companies? Actually, this is sort of a two-part question. A is, are you seeing pitches ramp up, and do you feel like your investment activity has ramped? And then B, are you helping them with that plan, or are you just seeing more of them come to that? Again, sort of the cash flow piece, but I'm curious on the anti-fund side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of inbounds and introductions and people excited to partner with anti-fund. I'm not sure if that's a reflection of macro or, anti-fund, building, somewhat of a track record over the last year and a half. But I think in terms of, so like overall, like inbound top of funnel activity has increased, but I would say we're much more circumspect in terms of deploying capital, deploying time. I think we have a lot of projects in motion that we want to make succeed, right? Like, I think every incremental responsibility you take on, by definition, detracts from focus. And then two, I think there's just like an increased focus on people that are as disciplined and quirky enough to fit and vibe well with both a Jake Paul and a Jeff Woo, right? Like, I think like we just are getting a sense of who our tribe is and kind of the areas that we like to play in. I think the fortunate thing about anti-fund is that it's not like where Jake Paul makes his living. It's not where I make my living. It's really just like a passion project for both of us. And I think that's why it's like really just like a fun. So in some sense, it's like we don't need to do anything unless like we both are freaking down for it. So I think it's like literally like one of the best projects that I've been lucky enough to like create. So in that sense, like the bar of, hey, like Jake's super busy. I got, projects going on. We're looking for just like stuff that we really think is both like amazing from a technology and a market and a cultural perspective, as well as like I think just wanting to invest, support like great people. I think at some level, I just want, if me investing some money creates a great friendship, that's like the cheapest way to get a great new friend, like in some level. And so far, that kind of personal high bar of our own limited time and energy has been like a decent barometer for like selecting great outcomes. Like assuming that you think that we have reasonable taste in people and reasonable taste in market opportunities. Yeah, I mean, I think that's like an increasing question. Like, do we try to scale this up? How would we scale this up? And I think those are those open questions. Maybe it's like just not scalable, and that's probably fine because like I don't think venture is actually that scalable in some sense, right? Like I think you've seen the SoftBanks, the Tigers, a lot of these crossover hedge funds trying to scale up venture, and so far that has not paid off, right? Like they're down a lot. Not to say like they won't be successful long term, but so far like track record of trying to scale up venture too aggressively and losing that artisan touch and taste making and care and attention, the track record for that is not as good as like, hey, the bespoke custom artisanship of venture capital. So I think in some sense we're much more aligned to that latter school than the mega super cap index everything approach.
I would
I mean,
be
that's
very
not who we are.
surprised. Yeah, well, I was going to say I'd be very surprised if Tiger could replicate their strategy now. Very surprised, given
Yeah.
the change in the climate. I think it'd be
Yeah, I
a
mean, I think they're
tall
good
bar.
guys. I think
Oh,
yeah,
of
the
course,
product I
of
think
course.
made sense at the time. Maybe I was like, yeah, like this time last year, people were like, "Holy f, these guys are like freaking kings,"
Yeah,
and
what
now
they
like,
deployed
oops.
$15 billion in Q1 and two or something.
Yeah, and everyone was like writing thought pieces and like literally going viral, commenting on like the Tiger strategy and how like they're geniuses and stuff. Look, I mean, like a part of me would be snark and be like, "Oh, they're complete clowns." But like, look, I like SoftBank was like down, up, down, up, down, up. I think to have the courageousness and boldness to like allocate and fire and take a big risk is commendable. But maybe I've
I
matured in
agree.
that sense, where it's like very, very easy to be snark and be like, "Oh, someone's down." It's like, look, like it takes huge courage to like have that much conviction, deploy that quickly, and have a unique, differentiated take on how to do the investing business. And I guess like maybe this is some maturation or learning. I feel like unless you really are perfect, you're like a religious deity. Look, you've probably messed some stuff up, and like if people are just out there shitting on you when you like made a mistake, it's like, hey, we're in America. Like we have second chances. Like as long as like you don't be Elizabeth Holmes and literally fraud people and like mess like people's healthcare decisions up, right? She's gonna go to jail. But like if you're just like earnestly trying to like do something, like deploy a lot of capital, change how you can index into tech companies. That's life. Like not like people aren't gonna execute perfectly on everything. And I think part of me is much more gracious and have grace on people trying and failing, and hopefully, they gotta lick their wounds, figure out how to come back, gotta re-earn trust, re-earn respect. What I realized is like they've probably like learned a lot of hard stuff that like I haven't learned yet. Like if you go through that much pain and embarrassment and shit, like those crucible moments are some of the moments that I have, when things are not going my way. Those are the biggest places where you learn. So the sanguine outlook for like the folks at like these funds that are licking their wounds right now, maybe they like learned some deep painful insights that like they can come back and hopefully do well with. Like good luck to them.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's far more commendable to try. We're coming up in the hour, and I want to be respectful of your time. I have two questions for you, but I'll ask them in the same question. If you were to give any recession proofing advice to a pre product market fit company and a post product market fit company, what would you give?
Pre product market fit, and I'll just tie it back kind of Eric and Kareem's story. So for their first company, Paribus, like basically email price checking differences, they were applying the Y Combinator. This was probably 2012, 2013. And they were, long time like high school friends, and they were asking for YC interview advice. And they were like a little bit worried about launching. It wasn't perfect yet. And I was like, yo, effing just like show the product to people. Yeah, and I think, they've been very gracious to give me some credit to be like, yeah, like that accelerated, like kicked Kareem's, in the butt to like just go and get it out in front of customers' faces. So I'd give that same advice again, which is that if you're pre-revenue, pre-product market fit, I get it. Like it's your baby. You have like this massive theoretical idea of like why this is going to change the world. Like get outside of your ego. Just talk to people. No one's going to steal your idea. Your idea is probably like pretty clever and smart, but like, look, it's just like actually like hit the rubber on the road. Like just actually talk to people and get your idea test kicked, right? And what you want to see is people being like, yo, like that's dope. Let me like, can I test it? Can I buy it? Can like, what can I do to like alpha it, right? Like that's what you're looking for. People pulling it from you. And that's probably going to be on the rarer side. But if people are like, hey, like I don't know, maybe you should do this instead, right? Like that's super valuable learning, right? You don't want to be building something that people that no one actually wants for 6 months and then just talk to people you never launch. Just like get rejected earlier. Have people tell you why your idea sucks earlier, because then you just save so much time and energy not building the wrong thing. So just have some courage, be a little bit fearless, be a little bit shameless, just like sell people on like your idea and see the response and be intellectually honest. People just being nice to you, or people literally trying to pull it from you. And like I think for like the outcomes that like are super exciting, you want people like more on the pulling. Like, hey, like I'm down to pilot, I'm down to alpha. Like, let me know when you have something testable. Yeah, be scrappy with it. On post product market fit, I think you're in a awesome spot. Like credit to you. Like it's very, very hard. You're starting to get to rarefied air here. So I don't want to be this arrogant armchair conceited quarterback where I'm going to tell you how to run your own business. But some broad principles to consider are, just like channel focus and depth focus. I think like there's always like a kind of a math equation. Like, can you add more value to your large customers? Do you want to go broad? Oftentimes, like really, really focusing on like the top 5%, 10% of paying customers, like they really, really care about your product. They really, really care about your area. They probably are at scale, are really smart, right? Like they're somewhat successful to be like a top 5, 10% customer of yours. Like their stuff is like they're put together. They kind of know what the hell they're doing too. Be their best friends, understand what problems they're thinking about. Can you solve more of their problems? Oftentimes, like how do you make them your best friend so you can like help them more? Like oftentimes I think it's easy to be like, oh, I just want to find the next shiny object, for like, hey, your best people are like your existing day one believers who already are like anchoring your business. So those are just some thoughts in terms of like not being overly caught with like the next new idea.
I think that's great. It reminds me of an anecdote from Ben Horowitz and Mark Cranny, who was their old sales guy at VMware.
Yep.
Their objective in sales was not, are you closing the deal? But this is dated a little bit, but who gets a key card to walk the halls? If you have a key card to your customer's building, that is a true win. If you're always there, if you're on the boots, like true boots on the ground, true boots in their building, walking the halls, you know you've won. final question before we end it. What are you optimistic about going forward?
I feel like maybe this is me, like, in my 30s now. I think it's like I'm just like optimistic to like enjoy the journey. Like, I think oftentimes when you're like grinding in the startup world and the business world, like it's stressful. You always want that next incremental thing. But I think, and people have told me this, and I'm gonna like, I'm gonna repeat like those things. Like, you gotta like enjoy the journey, like while you're in it. Like, celebrate the little wins, celebrate with your people, celebrate with your teammates. Like, it is pretty damn cool that in a world that's like pretty chaotic, like I think the last 2 3 years have been out of a movie. There's folks like you, folks like us, just like trying to self-actualize, trying to create, trying to build things that entertain ourselves, entertain the world, add value to the world. So as long as that human ingenuity, that resilience is still there, like I'm just generally pretty optimistic. So yeah, I think I almost like try not to think that macro. I think if you're in this business of like startups and entrepreneurship and being a founder, being an operator, like that you have ambition, you have like that drive. I think that like the real question is like, can you wake up smiling every single day to like do that every single day, right? Like that to me is like the real trick. Like no one's gonna doubt anyone that's probably listening to this podcast. Like like your top 1% in terms of ambition and drive. You're smart. Like you're spending like an hour of your valuable time listening to Kimmy and I, bouncing around here. That already shows that you have like that desire. I think the question is like, can you make this enjoyable, and can you make it this consistent over like the long haul?
I love it. Jeff, what a place to end. I've really enjoyed our conversation. This has been a ton of fun. Any final plugs? Where can people find you? Anything you want to finally promote before we call it?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Twitter, at Geoffrey Woo, GeoffreyWoo. Ketone Drinks, hvmn.com, archive.com, Anti-Fund VC. Thanks so much.
I love it. Jeff, thanks again for your time.